This is a series of 3 short videos. They can be viewed in any order. I do recommend viewing this one last, as it contains more detailed advice based on the explorations in the other 2 videos. The aim is to explore the foundations of using acupuncture based on palpatory findings, including common mistakes made. This series is not about imparting technical information, such as the use of specific protocols and points, but rather to look at general guiding principles. This video is composed of so-called advice for practitioners and is formulated as sayings or little poems that are hopefully making it easier to remember and apply the information or the advice. And just as a reminder, I often use the term abdominal findings interchangeably with palpatory findings. Usually, abdominal findings implies all palpatory findings, simply because we do indeed focus a lot on the abdomen. Our first saying is, history comes first. Though history is primary, stay in the present moment. The biggest mistake I see people make is not knowing the full medical history and then trying to treat the symptoms only or clear the abdominal findings without considering how they came to be and how they fit in the overall picture of the patient. The medical history gives you the most important tool in prioritizing your treatment. Start by addressing the first known injury and assess how well it affects the abdominal findings. The idea is that if you address the first issue and free the body from it, issues that came later will unravel and resolve, kind of like a domino effect. Of course, that is not always the case, and sometimes what appears to be the first injury seems to have no effect on clearing the abdomen or the symptoms, but some other past injury does. This does not make the idea of treating the history wrong. It simply exemplifies that not every medical event is going to be trapped in the body. This means that the first actually means the first event that either registered in the body, meaning you can see or palpate it in the abdomen, neck, or back, or that addressing that issue resolves many abdominal findings and hopefully clears the symptoms. Working with just abdominal findings or just with a history does not yield the best results. It is correlating the two, the history and the abdominal findings, and continuously searching for treatment points that address both history and findings that tends to give the best and or the most lasting results. Our next saying is, collect all the pieces of the puzzle. Be an express train. Know all the actions, all the stations. Know your route and move as swiftly as you can to your destination. What this means is palpate the whole abdomen before trying to address it. Do not try to address or treat one part of the abdomen without knowing the larger picture. Addressing one piece at a time is like taking a train that stops at every station and possibly never reaches the destination. This is another common mistake that I see, mostly by those who are new to this style. When we first learn to use abdominal palpation, we tend to try to find something and then immediately we try to fix it, using the protocol we have learned to address that specific finding. When we do that, it means we're chasing one finding at a time. A number of problems will then arise. For one thing, although the abdominal finding says X, the protocol for X may not be successful. This can be because there is something deeper that hinders the protocol from being activated. Other abdominal findings or the medical history might reveal to you why the protocol is failing. It is not unusual for a standard protocol to not be effective until something else is being addressed, and then, like a charm, it starts to work. Another reason why the standard protocol is not working might be that it is just not the correct protocol, and we did not realize it because we did not look at the abdomen as a whole. For example, you might find that kidney 3, which is the uterus reflex on a woman, and you try to clear it with liver 8 because you think, oh, there's fibroids involved. Or, for example, with spleen 3 because this woman is complaining of menstrual cramps. And these points don't seem to work. Later, you find pressure pain on stomach 9, and now you're saying, oh, this person has thyroid issues. And now, when you're treating the kidney channel, in order to treat the thyroid, it resolves the uterus reflex, kidney 13, as well as the stomach 9 reflex. Officially, the ovaries are in the kidney domain, and the uterus should officially be in the liver or the spleen domain. So you may not have tried kidney points unless you knew about the thyroid issue. That means that getting the whole picture saves you a lot of time. I palpate the whole abdomen without making any assumptions about it until I have gotten the full picture of the abdomen and the neck. I usually don't palpate the back until after the front treatment, but you can certainly do the back up front as well, meaning palpate the back first and then turn them over and do the front treatment. While I'm palpating, I can name what I find to myself, things like oketsu, adrenal, immune, liver, things like that. But it is better to not get attached to those labels, but just keep them in mind. I also do not prioritize yet, and I do not attempt to resolve anything until I have completed my initial palpation. There's always the temptation to try and resolve something just because you found it. Then I go through a process that I call prioritization, and only then do I test different treatment points. Do not chase reflexes, build up a strategy. So basically, do not chase one reflex at a time. Get the full picture and treat it as a whole. Then address the symptoms. And get the full picture and treat it as a whole. Then, when you add points, you can address symptoms or reflexes that might still need to be addressed. But first, do the whole thing. Try and get at the root. Prioritize your findings. Correlate the physical palpatory findings with the history. Try to go for the oldest. Now that you know the medical history and have palpated the abdomen and the neck, you have the building blocks to start looking at a treatment. We know the complaint or the complaints, we know the medical history, and well, we also know the abdominal findings. We now supposedly have a full picture. This picture can still get more refined, and we may need to palpate more or ask more questions. But we do have our first view, and we might consider that to be the full view for now. I do my best to correlate the physical abdominal findings with the history. Can I explain why the abdomen shows a certain reflex? I do not have to be able to explain it, but I am simply seeing which reflexes might be related to each other, perhaps causing each other, things like that. This is what you might call the diagnosis. I prioritize which findings are likely to be the most crucial. Often those are the ones which reflect older issues that are still stuck in the body. It is always a bit of a gamble as to what to treat first, and you hope it will pay off. That is, it will clear many abdominal findings. not just the ones officially related. And you also hope that it clears the actual symptoms. When I look at prioritization, I look at how different disorders will affect others, as well as how deep each issue is. Immune issues, adrenal exhaustion, autonomic nervous system disorders can be separate issues, or they can be a continuum where a long-term immune challenge eventually depletes the adrenals and wears out the nervous system. This continuum does not have to start with the immune system, the way level, so to speak, and one whose nervous system does not adjust easily can result in immune weaknesses as well. There's no clear directionality here, but rather it is an axis where one needs to evaluate which issue appears to be primary and to which the other two will respond once treated. Lack of stomach qi can also be part of this axis, as well as the thyroid. Some treatments tend to take priority in the sense that the patient will not respond, meaning the findings will not be resolved, until those are addressed. Those issues are things like blood pressure problems, especially low blood pressure, adrenal exhaustion, lack of stomach qi, immune issues, vagus nerve congestion, and inguinal or inner thigh congestion. Autoimmune and metabolic disorders like sugar metabolism also take precedence, as they affect every cell in the body. While these need to be addressed first, if they act as your trump card, meaning they clear all the findings, you may consider delaying their application until you confirm other treatment strategies. I call this taking insurance, or you might consider it to be extra or secondary strategies. So you want to be able to confirm your secondary strategies and not just use your primary strategy. Figuring the first needle is a bit of an art. Rather than worry about that, the easy solution is to simply test all your propositions up front before doing any needling. I test each idea, each so-called diagnosis, by applying pressure on their treatment points, and I evaluate just how effective each point is in releasing both the reflexes it is associated with, as well as, and perhaps more importantly, how effective these points are on reflexes that point is not known to release. It's not a textbook situation for that point. Then I start to needle. And yes, as I needle, I will discover more than I did when I just was pressing points, because with a needle I can have multiple points working together, whereas with mere pressure, I'm limited by how many fingers I have. And obviously, I cannot press on both a leg and an arm point at the same time and also retest the abdomen, because that would require 3 hands. So this means that with pressure, I am generally able to check only one point at a time, one hand pressing on the point and the other hand rechecking the abdomen. Confirmation or disconfirmation, both are equally valid. Always ask, am I sure? Now I can have an idea that this patient has X symptom, and perhaps that X has been complicated by certain events in their medical history, and they show so and so palpatory findings. I have created a certain priority. I believe I need to treat a particular pattern in order to address the history and clear the abdomen. That sounds very nice, at least in theory, but now I have to prove my thinking on the patient's body. I have to put my theory into practice and prove myself right, wrong, or maybe just partially right. I confirm that my treatment idea is correct by pressing on the treatment points I have in mind. Perhaps because it is a protocol to release something in the abdomen, perhaps because it addresses a medical condition in the history, perhaps I'm hoping it will align some structural problems that I believe is preventing healing, or it can be a point with a name I feel relates to this situation. It can be many reasons why I choose a point. Pressing the treatment point, I confirm just how useful it is by seeing how much of the abdomen, as well as the neck, it clears. The more findings it clears, the more likely I am to use it. The best treatment points are the ones that clear all the findings. You cannot always get that. I do not needle points unless I confirmed through palpation or repalpation that that point is effective. When a treatment point is not confirmed, or is only partially confirmed, meaning it releases only some of the abdominal findings, or it does not release a finding 100%, that is just as useful as getting confirmation, except that it might be annoying to not get a resolution on the first try. When a point does not prove itself 100% successful, it means I have to rethink my strategy. Perhaps there is another event or condition in the medical history that needs to take precedence here, or I need to reprioritize which reflexes in the body are primary, or I need to reinvestigate, palpate more, ask more questions. This is what our next verse is about. Do not get stuck in diagnosis. The diagnosis is only useful in terms of you being able to treat it. There's no point naming things simply to satisfy the ego. To say, you have X, if you do not know how to treat X, is useless when your interest is in treating. It's all very nice if your interest is in labeling people, and there are people, that's their job, is to give you a diagnosis. They don't necessarily treat. I'm someone who's interested in treating, so that a diagnosis is just a tool to get me to the treatment. You might say to yourself, this is a thyroid condition, and conclude that the diagnosis is, quote unquote, thyroid. But just that is a shortcut that basically says this patient has pressure plane around stomach 9 and kidney 7 clears it and the abdomen as well, meaning kidney 7 clears the stomach 9 and the abdomen. Therefore, it's a good point. It's a point that treats thyroid by dogma. Therefore, the main issue here is thyroid. I don't expect some blood test or other physician to agree with this diagnosis. They might, but they might not. The patient may even already be diagnosed as having a thyroid problem, or they may be coming for symptoms often correlated to thyroid. But my use of the word thyroid is simply to give myself a shortcut that tells me what to treat, not a diagnosis that helps me communicate with other healthcare providers. If I find that a patient has pain on stomach 9, but it is released perhaps by REN4, I might decide to call it an autoimmune thyroid problem, simply because I associate REN4 with autoimmune treatments. I am not married to the words. More importantly, I'm not married to the ideas behind the words. I might think this is thyroid, but my best thyroid points do not seem to do much. I then release the idea of thyroid and look for other possible diagnoses. I then test out the new ideas by confirming how effective the treatment points for that diagnosis are, and either adopt or let go of the diagnosis. I can always come back to the original idea of thyroid and perhaps refine it. So this is really important. A diagnosis is a temporary tool that allows us to figure out a treatment. The more flexible I am and allow myself to shift diagnosis according to what I confirmed or did not confirm, the more successful I can be in finding the best treatment in cases that do not respond to my original thinking. This is what it means, do not get stuck in diagnosis, because if I get stuck in the thing that I thought it must be this, I don't allow myself the freedom to look for more. Basically, We get the information through history and palpation. These are steps 1 and 2. Then I prioritize the findings, correlating them to the best of my ability and creating a so-called diagnosis that has some treatment ideas and protocols associated with it. That is step 3. Then I confirm the treatment by seeing how effective those points are in resolving the abdominal findings. That is step 4. If I am successful, I move on to actually treating using needles, moxa, magnets, whatever. If I'm not successful in resolving the abdomen, I go back to step 3 and rethink the priorities, possibly create or add another diagnosis that I now attempt to confirm. And I loop through steps 3 and 4, the prioritizing, the telling of the story, and the confirming. And I do this as many times as it takes. It means that I need to go back to step 1 and inquire more about the medical history, or try step 2 and get more from the palpation, if I can no longer come up with another story, another correlation, another prioritization. So I keep going back between steps 3 and 4, and when I run out of ideas, I go back and get more ideas from the medical history. I question again. I go back to the body and question the body again. Are there findings that I was ignoring, that I didn't do a good job on, that I did not recognize that they were important? This verse, always seek the Joker card. Do not use it until you have insurance. And I used to call it the Trump card, but Trump card no longer sounds like it used to years ago. So we might want to use the word Joker card. So whether you call it the Trump card or the Joker, it is best to keep it for last. This is somewhat unique to my approach, and other practitioners will use their Trump card without any insurance. The Joker card or the Trump card is the point or the point combination that clears the whole abdomen. And in the case of symptoms that show as pain in the treatment room, they also clear the symptoms. In other words, it's a point that clearly does the best job. It feels like you don't need to do anything else. It is a point or point combination that does it all. And I'm always looking for that point or that point combination because it suggests that I found the true root cause. But I always ask myself, am I sure? A point may appear great on the treatment table and appear to offer a really elegant solution, but it is always possible that in a few minutes or hours, this will prove to be less effective than it appeared. If I have in mind that this person has X, Y, and Z in terms of diagnosis, and when I assess X, I got my trump card, meaning it affected Y and Z as well, there is always a chance, in spite of the theory, that Y and Z are actually not addressed as well as it seems to by the abdominal response. That is why I tend to take insurance. Yes, I got my Joker card. And now I try and resolve the abdomen by treating Y and Z rather than just addressing X with my trump card. If Y and Z prove to be successful strategies, even if only partially, I will still use those, and I will actually use them first, and only then I will use the trump card, meaning strategy X. The reason for using the lesser strategies before the trump card is that if I use the trump card first, I will have nothing left to confirm my secondary strategies, the so-called insurance strategies, because the trump card already cleared all the findings. And that means I have nothing to confirm against. And without confirmation, an idea is just an idea. It still needs to be confirmed. So now I lost my ability to confirm other ideas. So the other ideas may not clear the whole abdomen. The main idea, the trump card, so to speak, clears everything. But just because it's a trump card and clears everything doesn't mean the other ideas are not still useful for that person. Release all dogmas, but always be ready to use them. This is a bit of an aviism. The dogmas, or the protocols as other people will call them, exist because they have proven to be useful and effective. But sometimes they will not work in your clinic, or will not work for a period, or sometimes long periods of time. For example, people often tell me that they just do not find stomach chi to be effective. In which case, I usually suggest they just use stomach 41 instead and see if that works. At a later point, they might find the right resonance with the stomach chi point and might start to prove it being more effective. And some don't. We want to have all those protocols and ideas available to us so we can fully exploit and explore them. At the same time, we have to always be willing to accept that the best protocols, even when they appear perfectly suited by a theory, can fail. The protocols apply to many patients in many circumstances, but they do not apply universally to everyone. At some point, we are all called to go beyond the dogma, beyond the protocols, and make it our own, come up with new ideas. These ideas might be new to us, perhaps new in their application, or perhaps they're new to this patient or set of circumstances. Your biggest asset is your imagination. A good imagination, guided by knowledge and subject to confirmation. And that's really important, that we don't just imagine things, that we put our imagination to the test through confirmation on the body. That is what makes a great practitioner. If I'm always hiding behind established protocols, I will not be developing my imagination, and I will be missing out on both my own development and the opportunity for creating better treatments for patients. Address both sides and the neck as well. It is important to treat both sides, the front and the back. We can never tell where in the body there is a stored blockage that might pull back the patient's progress if it's not addressed. Many people who are used to the TCM style of treating only one side in a session try and replicate that in this style, and they find that their treatments are not holding quite well enough because they did not address the back and the spine. I always treat both sides. Usually I treat the front first, and then I treat the back. And I tend to prefer needling the patient lying face down, but you can do the back treatment also with the patient lying on their side if you wish. It's just, for me, less convenient to needle when the patient's on their side. I'm not at quite as good an angle for needling as I am when they're lying face down. The back is just more exposed for me in a better angle. Once you have the experience, the process of palpating, assessing, and needling takes about 5 minutes. Add to that, say, 20 minutes worth of needle retention on the front. You can now easily spend 5 more minutes to treat the back and leave the needles in for, say, 10 or 15 minutes, and you are still done in less than an hour. It really is possible. On the back, one can be a bit more simplistic and often use the reflexes as treatment rather than constantly trying to find remote points that resolve the reflexes, which is what we do on the abdomen. The back, specifically the spine, is a clearer or a simpler system that works more directly. However, there are times when you do need to look at resolving certain areas or reflexes before needling them, and prioritization should still be applied, even though it is somewhat less complex task than on the front. Another common mistake that people make is to literally take the expression abdominal diagnosis to mean the abdomen only. The neck is as important to address and release as the abdomen is. It is the connection between the brain and the organs, and the whole nervous system is affected by the state of the phrenic and the vagus nerves, meaning C3, C4 in the neck and the SCM in the front. For me, not touching the neck is like having a meal that has calories but no nutritional value. You will not be hungry, but you didn't get any good food. I also very often further release the neck mechanically at the end of the treatment with myofascial release stretching. That is just how important I see the neck as being. Build the basement before putting on the roof. Generally speaking, address the body from the lower part, the basement, upwards. It usually works that resolving reflexes on the lower abdomen take priority over the mid-abdomen or the chest, and clearing the lower parts tend to facilitate the clearing of the taller, the higher parts. This is clearly just a guideline, and you will often find that you need to clear findings higher up, most commonly in the neck. That will happen very common, in order to release something lower below it. But as a whole, I try and move from the lower part to the higher parts. A similar idea can be applied to needle order. I tend to needle the lower points, the legs first, before I needle the upper ones, the arms and the torso. And I tend to avoid using points in the abdomen until the very end, so that it is easier for me to keep checking the abdomen. It's not always comfortable for a patient if they have a needle in the abdomen and you're palpating close by. In a combination that has both a leg and an arm point, I will tend to needle the leg point first and then the arm. This allows for the legs to establish the chuai, the action of the inner thigh that supports the perineal floor and supports the spine and the abdomen. So it's just a way of, there are many people who say needle yang to yin, for example, which will be the opposite of what I'm doing. I'm actually needling the yin, the legs first, in order to establish the space that supports the abdominal and spinal spaces. Do not lead with the head. Let the body do the work, and only then involve the brain. Skull points have been getting more and more popular in the last few years. And this makes sense, given that we have become very brainy. We may not be smarter, but our daily activities are more brain-oriented with technology. And so more than ever before, we use our bodies less and less, and our brains more and more. It's not as if in ancient times the scalp or the brain were discounted. There are 36 traditional meridian points within the hairline, more than any other area in the body. The face, for comparison, also has another 25 points. And to compare, the hands have 17 points and the feet 24 points. And those are the areas where the meridians start and where we say they have the strongest influence, that these points are the most important in the hands and the feet. The lower abdomen has 20 points and the chest has 30. The chest is the area where the movement of chi is most obvious, although the lower abdomen as well. The movement of the intercostals with a breath is the movement of the chi. So clearly skull points have always held importance, even though they're not counted as, say, the 5 shu points on the meridians, or the different points, the way points, and the different influential points and stuff like that. But still, the number of points in the scalp suggests, the density suggests that the ancients already saw how important the scalp is. And it's become even more important in today's world because of our constant brain activity. Also, when we look at the names of points, we get to see the way the ancients assigned the importance to skull points. We have points like Du 24 and Gallbladder 13, Shen Ting and Ben Shen. And we have a point, for example, Sanjiao 22, He Liao, the harmony points. The only point with a character for harmony, which is a central concept in the medicine. Liao, 6 out of 14 points that are named Liao are on the face. Liao, although we translate it as a bone hole, is actually a bone that magnifies or emphasizes. It implies conductivity. It implies like wishing of the wind. The character is composed of the bone on the left and the sound of wind or soaring on the right. It is something like a conch, a crevice in the body that amplifies things. So this is what a liao means. And when we look, and this is sort of an aside, just looking at the points, these are the most popular point names. So the character shu to transport, for example, is the most points that have that character in it. That's 25 points have the character shu to transport. Most of them are on the back shu points, granted. And then we have characters men, door, zhong, center, yang, and tian, heaven. These are the only points that are more popular than the character liao, which I'm kind of translating as their capacity to conduct, to amplify. And you can see that liao is the 6th most common point name, or in a point name, and it is as common as the character guan, a gate or a checkpoint, or as the character yin. Even the characters shen, qi, and wind are less common than the character liao. And 6 out of the 14 of them are in the face. There are also numerous skull point systems taking advantage of this powerful area as a way to communicate directly with the brain and affect the body that way. Okay, so the scalp is very important, so why shouldn't we use it first? Okay, so this is because I prefer to keep the scalp points for last, not because they are not powerful enough, but exactly because they're too powerful. If I use skull points as my first points, I will not get a chance to test out all the other points that can be useful. This is because skull points communicate more directly with the brain, and once the perception, the messaging in the brain changes, the patient can no longer feel the pressure pain on the abdominal reflexes as they did before. So while this makes skull points very powerful, it also makes them too dominant, in that they often are the big trump cards that eliminate the findings. But as brainy as we are, we do still have a body. And it would be a mistake to work just with the brain, just with that trump card, and not mobilize the other resources. So it is important to also work with the body, which means I need to work with the body first in order to find out which points in the body to use, and only then I should use the skull points, because the skull points might eliminate all my findings. So this is the same as with the idea of not using the most powerful points first, so as to allow other points to emerge and to be used, even if only as insurance. I test skull points, but when it comes to needling, I leave them for last, simply so that I will have the opportunity to test all my strategies. So notice, I generally test everything in advance, so that when I needle, I can needle in whatever order I want. But I've done pretty much most of my testing in advance. I don't test and needle at the same time. That again is definitely my unique way of doing it. Not everybody does it that way. Let go of technique, but have it at your disposal. This is freedom through discipline. These are all pointers that come from my way of working and how I offer support to others when they seek advice in cases. There are always tons of details one keeps juggling. The different options from the medical history, the different options from the palpatory findings, the various known points to affect these, more points that one might consider, etc., etc., etc. Part of me operates a little bit like a little computer, evaluating each option and accepting or rejecting it. And I keep going through the options until the puzzle that we call the patient is resolved. This is all technique, and it's mostly mechanical. There's a fair amount of thinking involved, but it's still mechanical. Beyond technique, there is healing. And space and light are what healing is based on. Darkness and congestion are not conducive to health. Our job is to offer space and light. Technique allows me to refine and direct space and light, but it's not a replacement of them. The constant juggling and evaluation can feel overwhelming in the details at times, and it can be annoying, but it offers us something invaluable. We work with the mechanics in order to achieve freedom for the patient as well as for our own minds. We use the discipline in order to find freedom. All artists understand this principle. A musician practices the scales every day in order to have the freedom to play complex music. We need the technique in order to have freedom and capacity for complexity. But we have to be able to transcend technique, transcend mechanics. This is freedom through discipline, and it is a freedom that is solid and reliable.